What are important after-sales support considerations for hardness testers?
Well, that's a great question. The obvious thing to consider, of course, is who's going to be available for you after you buy it, right? Who's going to be available to ask questions, do help with any kind of troubleshooting, even potentially with training. Although most hardness testers are pretty simple devices once you get the basics, kind of read through the manual. So that's kind of the obvious question. And of course, buying from an experienced, reputable source, somebody that has open communication channels with the actual manufacturers, if they're a distributor, that's key there. So clearly, of course, our company, Metallurgical Supply, Matsuko, if you will, we're reps for Midatoyo, we're reps for King Tester, we're reps for Phase 2, for Starrett. So we have direct lines of communication right with the manufacturers, so that if it's something for some reason we can't answer ourselves, we can easily get right with the folks that design it, that manufacture it, and be able to get those questions answered. So a little plug for ourselves. There's a few other considerations as well. First off, how often do you actually check the performance of the hardness tester, or do your processes require that you check the performance of the hardness tester? If you're not familiar with it, the standard way to check the performance and just make sure that it is reading properly is to get a hardness test block. And you run a test on a certified kind of hardness, so a HRC test block, for example, that says it's 20.2 HRC. You make sure that the hardness tester you're using also reads 20.2 when it reads that block, because that block is certified to a certain hardness. Your process might say that you have to do a hardness check in between every single sample that you're testing. So you're going to go through a lot of test blocks in that case. Versus you might have a different process where it says, well, we just need to check it maybe once every 10 or once a day in the morning kind of thing before we run tests for the day. It all depends off of what your internal uses are, your internal guidelines and restrictions, or whatever kind of ISO standards, for instance, you might be trying to adhere to. So depending on the amount of testing, or rather checking, that you're going to do on your hardness tester, you definitely need to know how many test blocks you're going to want on hand, and make sure you have a reliable supplier for those hardness test blocks. Also, make sure you understand what hardness range you're going to be testing in, because if you're testing in multiple ranges, you probably want test blocks that are closer to each of those different hardness ranges. So in other words, you might be testing some materials that are closer to 20 Rockwell C, and then also some that are also upwards around 50 or 60 Rockwell C. So you're going to want a supplier that can help you out and get hardness test blocks in both of those ranges. Another consideration is, are you testing different sized parts or even different materials? Especially applicable for benchtop hardness testers. If you have different sizes and shapes, you're going to need different anvils. So the anvils are on a benchtop hardness tester what the actual metal piece or whatever part you're testing is sitting on. And those can be flat, pieces. They can be V for something like a pipe to sit on easily. Basically you want to get it so it's not rolling around or moving when the indenter is coming down on that piece that you're going to be testing. Again, the same thing. You're going to want a supplier that can help you kind of talk through those things, think through those things, and also, of course, supply you with those different anvils, different indenters potentially, depending on, again, what kind of tests you're going to be doing. Because you might be doing some tests in Rockwell C, but also in the Rockwell B scale. And those require two different indenters. So thinking through some of those aspects is really important for the after service aspect. And then the last item is, how often do you need to get actual calibration certifications? Typical ISO standards are going to say once a year. So that's something, but your internal processes are going to help define that better. Again, what standards you are trying to adhere to are going to define that better. But after you buy the hardness tester, it's not kind of one and done. You might still, on a yearly basis, or at least every now and then, have to get that actual certification done. And that requires you to either have somebody come on the site and certify it, or if it's a portable unit, you have to mail those back and forth potentially, or have somebody pick them up, drop them off. And so you want to make sure that you're set up, lined up with a actual calibration company to be able to perform those certifications for you as often as you need. And again, selfless plug here, at Suco, we have the ability to get those certifications done for you. So, mostly if you're in the Houston area, we can do it as well if you're not in the Houston area, but it might make not as much sense from a logistics standpoint. But if you're in the Houston area, then we'd love to be able to help out, get those calibrations done for you on however often you need as well.